A2 adventure bikes don't have it easy. They're meant to be suitable for long distance travel and friendly for beginners, yet also encourage off-road adventures, all at an affordable price. Now the Austrian brand Brixton is joining this fiercely contested segment with its very first adventure bike. Can the Brixton Crossfire 500 Storr live up to these high expectations? The truth reveals itself on the steep and sometimes wild roads in the Italian region of Friuli. All season long, Schaaf, Carlos and I had been waiting for the chance to set off on a revealing on and off-road tour with the lightweights among the adventure tourers. But since the new arrivals in the A2 segment took their time to show up, it wasn't until mid-September that the opportunity finally came. Alongside the new Brixton Storr, we also had the equally new KTM 390 Adventure R, and as the established veteran, the Royal Enfield Himalayan. We hit the motorway heading southwest towards graceful mountain scenery and slightly more relaxed laws, as we wanted a bit of loose surface under the wheels of our enduros. The Brixton Storr, however, isn't designed as a serious off-road machine. It sits more in that transitional zone between road touring and off-road adventure with its 19-inch front wheel. Beneath the striking exterior of the Brixton Storr works a liquid-cooled 2-cylinder 4-stroke inline engine with a displacement of 486 cubic centimeters, the same one already known from Brixton's Crossfire 500 naked bike. In the Storr, the engine produces 47.6 horsepower at 8,500 revolutions per minute and 43 Newton meters of torque. The suspension setup comes entirely from KYB. At the front there's an upside-down fork with 180 millimeters of travel, and at the rear a central shock absorber with 175 millimeters of travel. Braking is handled by J-Huan components with a 320 millimeter disc and a 4-piston fixed caliper up front, and a 240 millimeter disc with a single piston floating caliper at the back. With a seat height of 839 millimeters, it should also be manageable for shorter riders, though they'll have to cope with a fairly hefty weight of over 210 kilograms. Included as standard in this package are a 16-liter fuel tank, handguards, tank bags, engine guard plate, auxiliary headlights, a TFT display in a vertical enduro-style, LED lighting elements, a USB socket and a luggage rack. How well will the combination of all these features and details perform in Friuli? This often overlooked part of the Italian Alps is characterized by hundreds of narrow, extremely steep roads that higher up turn into gravel sections offering breathtaking panoramas. We've got 2 days of riding here using, as we often do, a Moho motorcycle hotel as our base. The Hotel Bella Vista in Rava Scleto in northern Friuli not only offers biker-friendly service, but is perfectly situated for exploring the nearby Panoramica del Vette and other passes in the area. And now we're heading up to one of those mountain passes. For the first time, greetings to you face-to-face from our tour. I'm speaking to you now from the summit, well, not quite the summit, actually that's just behind me, but from a slightly higher section of Monte Zoncolan. Some of you might recognize the name, a very cool mountain in Friuli with a rather demanding asphalt climb on its western ramp. Well known from the Giro d'Italia, which has crossed it several times, its steepness makes it one of the toughest ascents here in northern Italy. We thought we'd make a quick stop here, a beautiful panorama behind me, and by now we've already covered quite a few stages. For example, yesterday we rode over 300 kilometers on the motorway from Wiener Neustadt in eastern Austria, passing through Styria and into Carinthia, then along the main road towards Hermagor and the Gale Valley, and finally over the Nassfeld Pass. That was our route, that's how it all began. And as I said right at the start, it's quite a challenge to build an A2 adventure touring bike, because a lot is expected of it. On one hand, it's meant to overcome the weaknesses of the big adventure tourers, being easier to handle, more agile and often better suited to off-road riding thanks to its lower weight, but at the same time it's also supposed to carry over the qualities, the advantages, the strengths of those big adventure bikes: long distance comfort, for instance. So the question is the Storr really built for long distance touring? Basically, it offers a very relaxed adventure style riding position. The foot pegs, I'd say, are set centrally to slightly forward, so your legs and thighs stretch quite straight ahead, forming a right angle. The arms reach forward fairly straight towards the tank, giving you a comfortable distance. Honestly, quite comparable to larger adventure tourers. You feel comfortable right away, and with a seat height of 839 millimeters, it's actually quite manageable. The proportions aren't overly slim. It's not like the other bike we've got with us, the KTM 390 Adventure R. The Storr is a bit broader, more like a proper adventure tourer, but I think this bike is still perfectly controllable and maneuverable even for riders who aren't especially tall. Once you're out on the motorway, the first thing you notice is that it feels really planted on the road. The damping is solid, especially considering the Storr's fairly modest price tag. It's got KYB suspension front and rear, 180 millimeters of travel at the front, and I think 175 at the rear. Both adjustable, which is great. Even on rougher, older stretches of motorway, there's still a decent amount of comfort. Of course, it depends a lot on your height. For me, at 185 centimeters, the wind hits me quite directly on the nose. So you'd need to be noticeably shorter to really sit in the protected air pocket. There's also a bit of turbulence. So if you're planning a lot of long distance rides, I'd probably recommend upgrading the windscreen. But that's really nitpicking at a high level. Overall, I manage perfectly fine. Apart from that, vibrations are kept nicely in check, even though this engine needs to be revved quite high to get the machine up to a proper touring speed. We are cruising at just under 7,000 revolutions per minute. That's what the parallel twin needs to maintain around 125 to 130 kilometers per hour. But that high piston frequency hardly reaches the rider. There aren't any excessive vibrations. You only start to notice them a bit more when changing speeds or giving it full throttle on country roads, but even then it's never in a way that feels annoying or uncomfortable. Apart from that, the gearbox shifts smoothly, everything feels properly put together and well thought out. And something I really appreciate, which I haven't seen even from some more established brands, is that as standard it already comes with small tank bags and a rear tank pad. There's even a luggage rack fitted as standard, and we've mounted our trusty, well-tested SW Motec rack pack tail bag straight onto it. All in all, with the handguards giving a bit of wind protection, they're just plastic, nothing heavy duty. I'd still say that straight from the factory, it's pretty well equipped for touring. The range is decent too. We've got a 16-liter fuel tank, and on the motorway, we measured fuel consumption at 4.63 liters per 100 kilometers. So you can easily cover well over 300 kilometers on a full tank. The display shows around 360 to 380 kilometers when filled up, so yes, definitely suitable for touring. Luckily though, we didn't spend the whole ride on the motorway. At some point when we reached the Nassfeld Pass, the twisty sections there more than made up for those dull hours of straight motorway riding. For those who don't know it, the Nassfeld Pass connects Carinthia with Italy. It's an absolutely brilliant mountain pass. Despite the sometimes patchy asphalt, it's beautifully laid out with lovely flowing curves that link together perfectly, letting you really have some fun. And straight away there was a big grin under the helmet again, also because the Brixton really held its own here. I've already mentioned the suspension. As we received it, it was set up fairly firm in its standard configuration, not too soft, something I often expect from more affordable bikes, especially touring models. But here it worked perfectly. For quicker direction changes it felt stable and precise. Later on we softened it up a bit for extra comfort, and even then those KYB suspension components still responded beautifully. There's no excessive diving, and the feedback from the road is genuinely impressive for this price range. Really, the suspension response deserves praise. The same goes for the front brake. The lever has quite a soft bite point, which I actually think suits this kind of bike. You do need to apply a bit more hand pressure, but once you do, it's easy to modulate, and the overall braking feel inspires confidence. You can brake more sharply if needed, even considering the bike's relatively high weight. The front brake is excellent. The rear one, well, on its own, it's easy to modulate, but it does fade very quickly, especially here in Friuli, where you've got these really lovely narrow passes, single lane mountain roads. that are much steeper than the big, well-developed ones, simply because hardly any traffic goes over them. When you brake a few times a bit more enthusiastically into one of those corners, the rear brake starts to fade straight away. So perhaps not the most heat-resistant system, but once you know that, you can easily adapt your riding to it. We put it on the livestock scale, and I have to admit, we ran out of fuel. We couldn't fill it right up as we normally do, simply because there was no fuel left in the office and time was running out. So I'd say it had about half a tank, and even then it already weighed in at around 210 kilograms, without any luggage, of course. That means even if only about a third of a tank was missing, we'd still be looking at roughly 215 kilograms. And that's quite a lot for just under 48 horsepower. On top of that, the engine is a twin cylinder, not a single like the other two bikes on this trip. It needs revs. Quite a lot of revs actually, before it really gets going. And this combination of relatively high weight and a rev-hungry engine means that if you want to ride a bit more spiritedly, you really need to stay on the throttle. You have to twist it like flicking a switch and keep it in the lower gears, which means you'll be shifting fairly often. The good news is the gearbox clicks into place very neatly, but the biggest plus, in my opinion, especially on winding roads or when flowing through corners, is its steering behavior. What's really worth highlighting in a positive way is that this bike goes for a middle ground setup when it comes to adventure touring wheel dimensions, a 19-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear with a 110 front tire and a 150 at the back. That means there's a bit more rubber on the road, and I have to say these Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR tires work really well. Even in the OEM version, they perform brilliantly on asphalt too. That gives the bike a beautifully balanced steering feel. There are no sudden tipping points. The lean angle builds up very naturally, which really inspires confidence. Combined with the suspension, we were riding quite briskly and with a fair bit of lean both uphill and downhill, and the bike felt stable, smooth and predictable. You can really hold your line and keep your momentum, which that harmonious steering behavior helps a lot with. And you might be wondering what kind of electronics it comes with. Well, we've got traction control and of course ABS. No riding modes, no adjustable settings, and honestly I don't think it needs them. Even the traction control, I never once managed to trigger it simply because the engine delivers its power so smoothly. So on asphalt the performance is solid so far. Overall, as a complete package, I'd say it's a well-sorted bike, though of course there are a few areas where a bit of fine-tuning could still be done. But how does it actually perform on the gravel sections of our tour? I'll tell you about that later from the Straninger arm. And with that, welcome to the Straninger arm. Everything in that direction is Austria, everything over there is Italy. Friuli to be exact. After 3 days on the road with motorway stretches, twisty sections, mountain passes, gravel roads, and even a few rougher, narrow Alpine trails, not much more than that, I'd say we've put the Brixton Storr through a pretty wide range of challenges. That things didn't get too wild off-road actually suits the Storr quite well. Looking at its wheel dimensions and overall weight, it's clear this isn't a particularly off-road focused adventure tourer, but as an enduro style machine it still needs to handle a bit of that terrain, so yes, it's relevant. And how did it do? Well, overall it handled itself quite decently. Obviously the tires aren't proper off-road ones, they're 90-10 tires, which means they perform fine on dry ground, but once the terrain gets a bit rougher, you do start to miss some lateral grip. Still, that's something you could easily improve with different tires. The ergonomics aren't bad either. There's not an excessive amount of room to move forward, so if you're planning on doing proper hill climbs, you probably wouldn't pick this bike anyway. And even then, it might get a bit tight in that sort of riding position. What I really have to praise though, even off-road and on loose terrain, is the KYB suspension. It's genuinely well tuned. It responds nicely, gives good stability and delivers a solid sense of control. So definitely a thumbs up there. As for the braking, the front might feel a bit sharp at first, but you get used to it quickly. It works fine. The rear, on the other hand, started squeaking quite a bit after we'd got it properly hot on the asphalt while riding up the pass road. Long-term experience with this bike is of course still missing, but the rear brake was easy to modulate, so you could trundle quite comfortably along gravel roads and through gravel hairpins and the like. You can also see in several other places that this motorcycle really isn't designed for off-road use. For example, the gear lever is quite short, which makes it very hard to get underneath it and shift when you're wearing a chunkier off-road boot. And you'll be shifting often because, as mentioned, this parallel twin is very rev hungry. Above all, it doesn't have that much power, so with over 210 kilograms to move, especially on loose ground where traction slips a bit or when there are lots of bumps, it doesn't leap forward from a standstill. Even if you stay in the upper third of the rev range and wring everything out of it, it's still not a bike that delivers any great burst of acceleration. I don't think sporty riders will be looking at this kind of bike anyway, but for those who just want to trundle casually over a gravel pass now and then, it's absolutely fine. Mainly thanks to the ergonomics and the suspension. Whether the engine suits you or not, that's something you best find out on a test ride. As for electronics, it's got what you need. You can switch off the traction control and you can also deactivate the rear ABS. So technically, I'd say everything you'd need for light off-road use is there. So, what's the verdict on the Brixton Crossfire 500 Storr? For a first attempt, Brixton has nothing to be ashamed of. There are definitely areas they've done really well. It's a very friendly, easygoing touring bike. From our perspective, its biggest strengths are the suspension and the steering behavior. You can genuinely go on long tours with it without having to suffer or compromise. It's got everything you really need. For a price of 7,000 euros in Austria, you actually get a pretty solid level of equipment. Already with wind deflectors, auxiliary headlights, a USB socket in the cockpit, a nicely sized display and even small storage pouches. So you can really say it's got everything you need. Of course, there are still areas where it could be improved. First and foremost, perhaps a bit more brake endurance. The engine too, maybe they could tweak it to deliver a bit more mid-range punch. I'm thinking of something like the Honda CB500X as a reference point. If Brixton were to take a cue from that, add a bit more flywheel mass and some extra torque in the mid-range, this could turn into a genuinely great motorcycle, a truly capable A2 adventure tourer. It might still carry a bit too much weight around the hips, but if you're sticking mostly to the road, that's really not an issue. And who knows, perhaps there's still some room for refinement here. The market, of course, is merciless. 7,000 euros puts it towards the more affordable end of the scale, but it's by no means a bargain basement price. So it'll be interesting to see how many buyers it manages to win over. I'm just as curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, I just want to say thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a thumbs up and make sure to check out the other videos from Friuli. They took quite a bit of effort to put together. I even managed to drop the bike at one point. I'll tell you all about that in another video, so maybe that'll tempt you to have a look. And with that, I'll really say goodbye for now. Take care, see you next time.